On March 22, 1945, the physical reality of Berlin was one of total devastation. Daily Allied bombing raids had reduced the capital's historic boulevards and residential blocks to ash and rubble. To the east, the Soviet Red Army was massing along the banks of the Oder River, positioning their artillery for a final assault just 70 kilometers from the city limits. Simultaneously, in the west, American armored divisions were steadily advancing, driving their vehicles across pontoon bridges spanning the Rhine directly into German territory. Yet, amidst this collapsing infrastructure, hidden within a few surviving theaters that still had localized power, a film projector flickered to life. The audiences sitting in the dark that day were watching issue number 755 of Die Deutsche Wochenschau, the final weekly newsreel produced by the Nazi regime. Under Joseph Goebbels, the Ministry of Propaganda had built this program into a centralized media monopoly. For years, up to 3,000 film prints were distributed weekly to project a carefully curated vision of unstoppable military conquest to the masses. The logistics of editing, printing, and distributing 12 minutes of celluloid across a fractured, burning state required immense resources. That the regime chose to expend its final logistical capacity on a movie theater presentation reveals exactly how an authoritarian system functions when the physical state is dying, but the narrative apparatus refuses to yield. The opening minutes of issue 755 do not acknowledge the catastrophic territorial losses. Instead, the footage focuses on Captain Acta, a bomb disposal specialist calmly and methodically defusing unexploded ordnance in the streets of Berlin. By framing the destruction through the lens of a highly skilled specialist, the propaganda replaces the image of terrified, passive civilians with one of absolute competence. The city is broken, but the state's technicians are actively and efficiently managing the crisis. As the newsreel moves to the front lines, it attempts to project the image of a mobilized, unified people's war. The camera lingers on ordinary civilians and militiamen being trained to aim single-use anti-tank weapons like the Panzerfaust. The narrator speaks with supreme confidence, guiding the audience through what he describes as heroic, successful defensive stands at Malbork Castle in the east and the town of Altdam. The historical record contradicts this narrative entirely. German forces had already blown the bridges and abandoned the Malbork fortress weeks before this footage was ever broadcast. Similarly, the town of Altdam had completely fallen to Soviet forces 2 days before the newsreel was even screened in cinemas. The editors were no longer manipulating real news. They were manufacturing a phantom war out of archival scraps and localized skirmishes, using celluloid to mask the physical disintegration happening right outside the theater doors. The most carefully orchestrated segment of issue 755 is its centerpiece, the final official footage of Adolf Hitler emerging from the bunker beneath the Chancellery. The intended message is one of paternal composure. In the ruined garden, a seemingly steadfast leader walks down a line, patting cheeks and decorating deeply loyal youth. But the soaring, triumphant audio track is betrayed by the physical reality captured on the film. Hitler walks with a severe hunch, visibly aged, trying to conceal the violent tremors shaking his left hand. The soldiers receiving the Iron Cross in this footage are children. Conscripted into the Volkssturm militia, these adolescents were thrust into the rubble and expected to stall an overwhelming, heavily armored invading force with standard-issue rifles. This ceremony was captured by cameras around March 20th. Following this brief appearance, the official propaganda filming apparatus ceased operations completely. A dying dictator surfaces into the daylight just long enough to task children with the defense of his ruined capital, before retreating back underground for the last time. In its closing moments, the newsreel abruptly abandons any lingering illusion of victory. Instead, it deploys unfiltered, graphic accounts of Soviet atrocities in the occupied territories. The psychological goal of broadcasting such stark terror was calculated. The leadership believed that absolute fear would force the civilian population into a fanatical, fight-to-the-death resistance. This graph visualizes SS data measuring the civilian reaction. As state terror messaging sharply increases, civilian morale takes a steep plunge. Instead of combat readiness, the stories bred paralyzing fatalism. Civilians believed the invasion was simply karmic retribution for crimes Germany committed across Europe. By attempting to weaponize despair, the propaganda machine ultimately broke the psychology of its own people. The effort to inspire a final stand inadvertently finalized the regime's psychological defeat. Exactly 1 month later, the Reich's film distribution network completely ceased to exist. Cinemas were destroyed, power grids failed, and the railways needed to transport the heavy film reels were cut or set ablaze. When Joseph Goebbels delivered his final public appeal on April 21st, there was no cinematic illusion. His voice went out over the radio alone, while Soviet tanks closed the final ring around the city. Following the surrender, the Allied authorities immediately seized the surviving screens to project Welt in film, a new newsreel designed to forcibly expose the German public to the exact atrocities that Issue 755 had worked so hard to conceal. Issue number 755 proved that no amount of perfectly edited film could stop an advancing armored division. Yet its preservation leaves a striking historical record. When an authoritarian system faces total collapse, it will expend its final breaths to construct one last elaborate lie right before the screen goes black.